morning, everyone, and live from Vienna, Austria, it's Saturday morning. How is everybody today? It's lovely to see you. We have a very special show for you today. I'll just mention briefly that this weekend we celebrate the Sunday of All Saints. That's one Sunday after Pentecost. So happy upcoming Sunday of All Saints. And upcoming on Monday is the beginning of the Apostles' Fast. That's a whole month long for older calendar folks and just 2 weeks for new calendar people. I, my friends, am actually excited about this fast, even though fast at the beginning of summer is not everybody's favorite thing. But, as a post quarantine or post stay at home diet, I am happy to embrace a little bit of a tightening of the screws, of my daily discipline. And I have my food plan all ready to go. And with some intermittent fasting, one can put off some of the weight if indeed you have gained weight that you are not happy about throughout the quarantine period. I think this is a refreshing opportunity to, lose some of it. So I drink my matcha tea in the very early morning when I'm preparing for my audio podcast on weekdays. And that's what I have with some almond milk and with 2 teaspoons of coconut butter. This way it's nourishing and one gets some necessary and healthy oils. And then after I'm finished with the whole morning routine and I've done my power walk, then I can eat something around midday or a little bit later. And that is a big bowl of a lot of fresh greens. Some one can throw in some slightly, steamed broccoli or asparagus tips, this type of thing, with some red onions. It's very nice, and some legumes. But it's a big bowl, and this way I can just eat once a day. I've already been doing this past week, beginning on Wednesday, and I've been adding some boiled egg into it. I'll discontinue that. I'm not virtue signaling anybody about the fasting, my friends. I'm just sharing with you my little, refreshing my health and fitness program to pick up the tools available in our tradition in order to stay healthy, both physically and spiritually. And as far as the legumes go, I'll put in uh, some boiled beans into the salad, or chickpeas, or, it's either kidney beans, white beans, or lentils. It's better to cook them yourself, but when I don't have time, I just use a little can, the canned, and there's nothing added to them, beans or lentils or chickpeas. That's my little idea. And then, in the evening, one can have some leftovers of that if you weren't able to eat your huge bowl of salad. But one tries not to eat late in the evening. So the intermittent fasting part is that, say, well, I try to eat for the last time and no later than 5 p.m., right? So the window of eating is between 11 and 5. So there's only 6 hours within which you eat. The rest of the time, anyway, some of it is taken up by your sleep at night, which one also wants to regulate, because that not having your sleep pattern in order leads to obesity, especially in middle age, right? So I'm trying to get that in order. And then, you're fasting outside of that window, but you can have tea and water and whatever. You're allowed to drink something. Also, the matcha tea with the cocoa butter does not interrupt the fasting period. So that's very helpful, as nutritionists say today, for weight loss. Was that of any interest to anybody? I don't know, but let's get to our very special guest. Dr. Hermina Nedelescu is an Orthodox Christian and an academic neuroscientist and biologist. She is now a postdoctoral fellow at Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California. Her research involves, my friends, utilizing and engineering viruses in order to deliver fluorescent proteins to light up and hence be able to see or visualize neural circuits activated by drug seeking behavior. So her research, uh, the purpose of her research is to find therapeutic possibilities for drug addicts by figuring out the neural circuits and how they work that you know contribute to drug seeking behavior. Now, the reason we are talking to Dr. Hermina Nedelescu is that, first of all, she wrote me an email recently, and she was thanking me in this email for this video that I put out entitled The Communion Spoon as Icon. I don't know if you've seen this video, check it out if you're interested. But in the video, I mentioned some things about this article that came out online by Professor Constantinou, where I indicated some of the mistakes regarding the tradition of the symbolism of the communion spoon. And I just indicated that in the article, there was a importantly mistaken notion about the meaning of the communion spoon supposedly being to unify us. That was never the purpose nor the symbolism of the communion spoon, simply from a historical and sacramental theological perspective. That was wrong. Now, Dr. Nedelescu was thanking me because she said that she and other scientists in the Orthodox community were concerned by some of the views expressed in that article, and she was grateful that I indicated something, simply one thing from my field of research, being liturgical theology and the history of that, that I indicated that it was wrong. But her concerns are from a scientific side. Now, I just want to mention that we are also talking to Dr. Nedelescu because of her expertise in viruses. And she has serious concerns about what our church, a member of which she is, an active member of the Orthodox Church, she's concerned how we go forward in this period of the pandemic and the opening up of our churches, how Holy Communion will be distributed, and so forth. So we're interested in seeing her perspective as a doctor of science, specifically of biology. You know that the church does recognize the vocation of physicians and indeed of scientists who inform the work of the medical profession. I mean, if you think about it, if the church only recognized in the whole business of our physical healing, if the church only recognized her sacraments as the only place to seek physical healing, well, then we would be forbidden to appeal to or seek the help of physicians. And we have a whole category of saints, as everybody probably knows, of the healers and the unmercenary physicians like Cosmas and Damian, like Saint Panteleimon, like Cyrus and John, and others. So this indeed is a recognized vocation, and the insights and the vision of invisible things like viruses and other things on the level that the naked eye cannot see, but that scientists study and see, that invisible reality and their insights into it that most of us do not have are indeed recognized as useful to the church. So this is why we want to be attentive to what she has to say, and also her contribution to seeing the physical side of the sacraments, which nobody has ever denied until indeed our today, when oftentimes one hears opinions that seem to consider the holy sacraments after the consecration of the gifts as removed from physical reality. But indeed, our Lord willed it so that the church, in her sacramental reality, remain in this world, and on the basis of the incarnation, the real becoming flesh of our Lord Jesus Christ, on the basis of that physical and indeed spiritual reality, the human and the divine, the church was very careful throughout the centuries to guard both of those uh, aspects and realms as being equally real. And thus, the sacraments operate through physical realities, through a familiar symbol. We have to understand correctly what symbol means in sacramental theology. It's not just imagined. No, there is a familiar symbol coming from the word simvalo. The Greek verb simvalo means to throw together or to bring together. So the physical symbol, be it water or an icon, but in a special way, uh, the bread and wine, through that very familiar physical reality. What is brought together is the invisible reality, but indeed also our physical reality, our historical context. And so to discern what all of that means, how to keep it in balance, how not to completely either neglect the mystical side, that invisible reality, mystery, the hidden reality, and how also not to ignore, my friends, the physical reality, because you know that there were various heresies that did ignore the historical and the physical, the extreme case of which would be monophysitism. I'm not going to get into meophysitism or the nuances of that phenomenon, but I will say that insofar as we as church perceive Christologically also the mystery of the church that is both within this world and not of this world, we are challenged to discern also, my friends, to discern to what extent that physical reality still plays a role in the sacraments, including Holy Communion. It is not, please, uh, hear me say this, it is not a denial of faith in the sacraments. No, but our faith is always challenged to keep a balance between the mystical and the historical, the invisible and the visible, and to hold them together because they all have their role to play. And how God works in making well, first of all, himself so vulnerable to have entered our history, to have become flesh. Well, he also wills it that his church remains in this world and indeed functions through the physical species. And that does mean certain consequences of responsibility, first of all, that we be responsible, able to respond to his call also within that physical and vulnerable reality. And if we give up that responsibility and pretend that we don't have to respond also to the physical challenges within the church, well, then we will not be behaving according to our various vocations, which within the church also includes scientists, as I just said. But let me tell you about our delightful guest, Dr. Nedelescu. Now, she comes from Bucharest in Romania, but very early on, she did move with her family to the United States when she was 8 years old. But she was born in Bucharest to this Orthodox Christian family. Her grandparents are Romanian, and on her father's side, they are German Italian. Now, she was already at the age of 6 exposed to her mother's profession. In her mother's laboratory, her mother also was a scientist at the Bucharest Institute of Oncology. So little Hermina was already at the microscope at age 6 and fascinated by what she saw in visualizing pathogens and cell cultures prepared by her mother, as she told me. When they moved to the United States when Hermina was just 9, Their father was already there. Her mother Maria and her brother Julian moved in 1990. The father was already there. And then the family moved to California soon after that when Hermina was 12. And she remembers both in Romania and in the United States that they regularly attended the Orthodox Church as a family. Hermina decided to pursue a career in biology because it offered a wide range of explanations about the world around her from the viewpoint of behavior, evolution, and pathogens. And as far as her education goes, she did graduate the University of California, Irvine, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Biological Sciences in 2005. But before she graduated, she completed an internship at INSERM in Paris in the area of neurobiology. Then she conducted a post-baccalaureate research project in Japan in molecular neurobiology at the Osaka University Graduate School of Medicine under the mentorship of Professor Yoichi Yamamoto. It was during this period of her baccalaureate that Hermina met her husband, New Zealand-born Kevin Hunt. They married first at City Hall in Japan in 2006, and subsequently they got married in the church at St. John the Baptist Greek Orthodox Church in the East Village in New York City. I hope you enjoy the lovely pictures she has sent me. Kevin and Hermina have a son. They have a 4-year-old son, Adrian Hunt, and she sent me also some lovely pictures of her son, who is following in her footsteps and in both parents' footsteps in his, as you see, attendance of church. And he also attends preschool, just finished his first year of preschool at Shining Cross Academy at Saints Constantine and Helen Greek Orthodox Church in Cardiff by the Sea. That is the family's home church, the Proistamenos of which is Father Michael Sitaros, who is also the spiritual father of Hermina. Her master's dissertation focused on activity-dependent neuronal plasticity to support memory formation in a Pavlovian fear conditioning model. Now, for her work on experience-dependent neuronal plasticity, she was awarded a master's degree in biology from New York University in 2009 and a doctoral degree in biomedical sciences in 2014 from the University of Antwerp, under the mentorship of Professors Aoki and Gordon Arbuthnot. In 2014, Dr. Nedelescu was awarded a 2-year fellowship from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science to conduct whole brain tracing studies of long axonal projections under the mentorship of Professor Izumi Sugihara at the Tokyo Medical and Dental University. And that's actually in Japan, where their son Adrian was born in 2016. All right, everybody, on to the interview. Hello, Dr. Nedelescu. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sister Vassa. I'm delighted to be here today.
Let me get right to our questions. The first question for you is, what led you as an Orthodox Christian to be interested in the natural sciences in general and in biology and academic neuroscience in particular? If you could go into, how your field nourishes and or challenges perhaps your faith.
So I was exposed to biology at a very young age because my mother was a researcher in an institute in Bucharest of oncology. So she would often bring me into the lab and put me on the microscope. So I was introduced to the field of natural science and actually pathogens and the microscopy world very early on. And I've always been extremely curious. So that's what drove me into the area of biology. as an undergraduate student. And I'm still very curious, and that's what keeps fueling my interest in sciences. So from biology, it was a natural inclination towards neurobiology. And I noticed very early on, while I was still an undergraduate at the University of California, Irvine, that I was doing extremely well in the neurobiology classes. And it was because I was spending far more hours in that area and reading about neurons. At the time, we already had all the papers online. It was 2002, 2003 to 2005. So I would read for hours and hours all the academic papers I could find. And I was very intrigued by the cellular mechanisms of neurons, all the molecular events and cascades that went inside the cell. So from there, I evolved further and went towards the neurosciences because I'm really very interested in the changes that occur in the brain and how these changes are induced by our experiences of today and yesterday, and how these changes, which are induced by experiences, drive our future behavior. That's really very interesting. And the more I discovered under the world of the microscope, which is not visible with the naked eye, the more I had reverence and respect for God, and this inspired me about His marvels even more. And it does so more now as I'm gaining more experience as a scientist and discovering things every day. Actually, we make small discoveries every day that don't even end up being published, and only I know about them. So I marvel at those, actually.
So it's like God pays attention also to the details that nobody sees anyway, except for you and people in your field.
Exactly. That's what I think.
Well, I find it fascinating also. I have told already the viewers in the introduction to this interview that you also see that invisible world, as you call it, because I mean, theology has to do with an invisible world, and it's a funny thing that oftentimes, faith and reason or faith and science will be falsely, I think, juxtaposed or even opposed. But it's interesting that they're both in your area, certainly in your area, invisible worlds. But I don't want to get stuck there. So tell us, uh, are there aspects to this that are challenging to your faith or that would, I don't know, sort of shake your faith?
Yeah, when I saw your question, I was a little bit surprised because there's absolutely zero challenge for me. Actually, for me, the scientific findings only explain faith better. There is absolutely no opposition that I have ever experienced. Um,
Right, right. What I always find fascinating when we have the Sunday of the blind man, the man born
yes.
blind, and at the
Mhm.
end of that chapter in John 9, Christ says to those Pharisees and scribes that say, because Christ has hinted, that they're born blind. We're all, in a sense, born blind. And they say, are you saying that about us? And he says, well, if you didn't say that you see, I'm not quoting exactly, but you know, you say that you see, that's why your sin remains with you. And
Mhm.
I always found that interesting, especially in light of um, anyone who presumes that they see, you know, and increasingly science tells us that really things aren't what they appear to be, right? And
Right.
so that humble I think the humble awareness that we don't see everything, of course, both in the spiritual realm, but also in the physical realm. And so I think that what scientists are given to see, because they do have their own vocation, like you have a vocation that I don't see as it's certainly not outside the church. You're an Orthodox Christian, you have your vocation. And when you take a look at something like this new virus. The You have told me that the proper term is not COVID-19, but it's SARS-CoV-2. I can't remember it. What is it?
It is. So it's SARS-CoV-2, and that's because it's a cousin of SARS-CoV-1, which was here in an epidemic in 2002, 2003.
Right.
And the disease at the time, 2002, 2003, is severe acute respiratory syndrome. And this time around, there's debates saying that perhaps they were too scared to associate it and call it SARS again because it was so scary back then. And so they gave it the name COVID-19, which is coronavirus disease 2019.
Right. So
Which,
before we get into it, I just want to establish that when you take a look at this reality that's invisible, and a lot of the difficulty of dealing with this also for the public and for everybody is that it's invisible. So I just want to say you have a certain insight into the invisible reality that is the virus, whether it's in our churches or the possibility thereof. And when you look at the chemical or biological, I don't know the proper term, reality of everything involved in going to church, also approaching Holy Communion, I just want to point out that your insight is different because you see things that we don't. And that is not an invalid or invalidating your faith kind of vision. I just want to establish that. And then I will properly ask your second question. Could you, before we will get to that question everyone's waiting for, could you briefly explain your personal work with viruses? Because I want people to know that you actually work with viruses. You know what you're talking about. And tell us also the purpose of your research of the neural circuits of certain types of behavior.
yes. So I do work with viruses. I love them because they have revolutionized the field of behavioral neuroscience. It enables us to light up neural circuits, meaning how neurons are connected with each other in the brain. And so, what I particularly do is I will deliver a specific type of virus to the animal. Um, I do have an example I can talk about. I have shared a picture with you. How
Wait,
should we?
do you, okay, for the layperson, we, a lot of us, I just speak for myself anyway, don't understand a lot of things about this. So you insert a virus? Do you engineer viruses?
Yeah, so sometimes we do have to engineer them. I particularly would typically do that together with a viral core or who can package it. But essentially, we have to engineer them because there's different types of neurons in the brain. For example, some of the primary types of neurons are one population is excitatory, the other one is inhibitory. If I want to access only the excitatory population, then I need a specific promoter, a specific sequence of genome inserted into that viral construct so that it is so that there's also a fluorescent protein which gets inserted into the viral construct. That's very important because that's what ends up being the fluorescence of the in the neuron.
So you
And
can,
so we
so you can
we
see.
yeah, so excuse me, we can actually restrict the expression of the fluorescent protein, and we use a virus to deliver this fluorescent protein to the specifically to excitatory neurons, for example.
And the purpose of this regarding behavioral, I want you to explain to us what this purpose, the good of like addictive for people who are addicts and when they're seeking the drug and all of this stuff. Tell us about that.
Yes, so we train animals to learn that a specific cue, either an environment, a smell, or a tone, is associated with the prediction that the drug will be available. Okay, they press the lever and they get cocaine. And so, to find out what changes occur in the brain after we train the animal, and there'll be a test day where we put the animal in the context of that cue. We try to understand what changes are associated with that period when the animal is seeking the drug, because we want to understand what neural circuits are being activated during this drug seeking behavior so that we can find out where they are, and later we can design therapeutic strategies to dampen them and suppress drug seeking behavior, to correct the behavior. So what we do with the virus is we will inject it into the brain to label specific neurons that we want to study. And the way we do it is that there's actually, we want to know what neuron is connected to what neuron and which of these neurons within the neural circuits are being activated. So we combine viral tracing to light up the neuron and its connection with a marker that shows us neuronal activity. So now we have both the actual map of where this neuron is going, as well as whether it's active or not. So I shared the photo with you, which you can share in how you do it in your screen, where I delivered a adeno-associated virus, which, by the way, the viruses I use primarily are viruses that are recognized by the immune system. So the immune system does not react in any negative way. They are harmless even within the host cell. And so I deliver a virus which encodes a red fluorescent protein into a part of the cortex. That virus works in a retrograde manner, meaning backwards. It infects the axon, the projection. It travels back to the soma, and it lights up my soma red. So you will see this red virus-infected neuron in the brain in the image that I shared with you. And then we can do a staining on top of that and determine and find out whether this neuron with the projection that's talking to the cortex is active or not. So we get a window of a visual of what's happening inside the brain in different parts of the brain, whether it's the hippocampus, the thalamus. These are just different regions of the brain. And we can piece together how these local circuits connected to the main cortex, which we believe is driving the primary drug-seeking behavior, how they are activated, and we're mapping out essentially.
So the ultimate purpose of this would be to help human beings who are addicts, right, to be able to somehow, intervene and help them with the compulsion to find.
So our work is preclinical. It's very mechanistic. We discover the neurons, the neurochemicals that are involved during this drug-seeking behavior. And then from there, it would go to the next step where we might design a therapeutic to reverse the drug-seeking behavior. First, we need to show it in animal. We cannot do some of these experiments in human. We're very invasive. And then it would go, our work and our findings would inform clinical studies.
But let's back up a little bit to what you said about the virus that you engineer not harming the animal. So I want to get to what a virus is and how it can be said. I think when people think virus, it's like this evil thing, or it's this thing that is just like harm, incorporalized. Is that a word? I don't want to say incorporated, incarnate. So what is a virus and what is the purpose? Maybe it can't be said as a generalization, but tell us, what is a virus?
So a virus is a microscopic agent that replicates its genome or genetic material, and it does this replication only inside of a host cell. It cannot do it by itself. It needs the machinery of a living cell in order for it to replicate itself. And the majority of viruses have this evolutionary pressure to replicate themselves. That's their job. Um,
That's their
that's
only job, right?
that's their job.
Replicate themselves, not to necessarily. Am I correct in this? I don't want to lead the witness. It's not their. Is it, or is it not their purpose to bring harm?
Harm? No, it has. They're immaterial. I mean, if there's any quote unquote harm, that's up to how the host cell responds. The viruses, for example, which I use, AAVs, they're recognized by the host cell, the immune system, so there's no reaction there. And even with SARS-CoV-2, there's actually uh, there's asymptomatic people, so some immune systems do not react.
Okay, so some immune systems simply recognize this virus and they can live with it.
Yeah, they either either an innate immune response is kicked in where the virus is taken care of by the immune system, or an adaptive type of immune system, or perhaps it is recognized. We don't know in the case of the SARS-CoV-2. It's a very new virus that has recently entered the human species, so we don't know whether we have our immune system has prior record of other coronaviruses, and if that's helping. That's a big question. We will find out.
Right. So this is, to mention your article that I saw online that you published, a brief article. By the way, it was very helpful and illuminating. So thank you for that.
Thank
Um,
you.
you did mention the phrase, and I quote, "Viruses are harmless on their own." So you just explained that on their own, without a host, they are harmless. So when a virus is on a material thing, on a surface, or on some material element, right? It is harmless
Yes,
insofar as it sits there.
yes, it cannot do anything, and eventually uh, it will die off because it needs a living cell.
Right. So one could say, were one to say it's possible, say somebody coughs into the holy chalice and the virus is there, right? The virus is harmless.
Yes, it
To
would be
us, while it's
harmless.
in there. But were it to land then in a person's mouth, right, or in their eyes or whatever, this is where then it depends on how the human being reacts to the virus, right? Um, recognizes it or not, that what happens next? If the human being doesn't recognize the virus, we'll get back to the issue of Holy Communion. Just tell me what
Yeah.
happens in a human being who doesn't use the proper terms. Sorry.
Yes. So, as I said, a virus is immaterial, meaning it's not important on its own. It needs a living cell, and so if a human is gets it in one of the in your mucosa membrane, it's usually the mouth or the inside of the eye or the nasal cavity is lined with cells which have a receptor. And I've shared a photo with you, and it's also in my online article of this virus, and it shows the host cell has a receptor called an ACE2 receptor. Well, the cells lining our mouth, our nasal cavity, our inside of the eye have this receptor which allow the virus to bind, and that triggers um, a whole set of cellular events to allow the virus to enter this living cell, and that's where the host cell may respond in a different way. I want to say that receptors can be thought of as doorbells. So if a stranger comes at your door and you don't expect, everyone in the house is going to be surprised. Whereas if you expect someone at your door, then perhaps you're more calm. So this is a new virus. The living host cell of the human does not expect it to come to the doorbell, the ACE2 receptor, and it can very well, in some cases, the host cell can react negatively. I do want to say that actually, even within the immune system, the virus, once it affects the human, this particular one, SARS-CoV-2 and probably other viruses, it these symptoms, the serious symptoms, don't actually occur until after the virus has replicated. All the viral, not all, but a lot of the viral load has decreased. That's when some of the serious symptoms start, when people need a ventilator and these things. So it's
What
after
do
this
you mean
infection.
when the viral load has, what did you say, has decreased? What does that mean?
So the virus enters the human host cells, and it's going to replicate a lot. It's going to make lots of copies of itself, and this takes its course. So when I say viral load, I'm trying to say it's going to be lots of viral particles in your immune system, and then they decrease after about 5, 6, 7 days. It has done its job to replicate. That's it. But then the immune system can get quite confused, and that's where the serious symptoms start. It's after that
So,
viral replication has gone down.
okay, so the virus, if it's been transmitted, the person is infected, if that's the correct word. Is that the correct word?
Yes.
The virus gets busy replicating because that's its purpose. And then it's how the immune system reacts. So, another thing that you wrote in your article, and this is my fourth question actually, you said in the case of Holy Communion that it's not an illness or disease that can be transmitted through the sacred species. And you'll explain to us from a scientific standpoint what we're talking about in the sacred species, not on the sacramental level. You said it's a virus that can be transmitted through the sacred species, but not a disease or illness. So, can you go into this more? You've already touched upon it.
Yeah. If we want to be surprised, the actual entity that is being transmitted and transferred from person to person is the actual virus. That's the agent that's being transferred. So an illness or a disease is characterized by symptoms. In the case of COVID-19, the symptoms are anywhere from headache, muscle ache, low-grade fever, and some people respiratory distress. Those are the symptoms that characterize a disease. But it's the actual virus that is in, getting transferred, to be
Right.
precise.
In those people who, for whatever reasons that we often don't know, right, do not recognize the virus, right?
Or the response is just could be a negative response in some people, whether it's due to recognition of the virus or not. We are not sure yet in the case of SARS-CoV-2. I know for for an adeno-associated virus, yes, the immune system recognizes it and it doesn't react. It's okay with it with this virus being present.
Well, how about this virus surviving on surfaces? Say, well, what if, an infected person that's asymptomatic, perhaps, uh, I don't know whether they touch the communion spoon or touch the edge of the chalice. In some churches, we have the kissing of the chalice, or just stands there close enough to the chalice, say the celebrating priest, or those who are assisting the priest, and say through coughing or so. My question is, how do we know anything about the survival of the virus on the holy vessels?
Um, well, no experiment has been done yet, but there's been, in terms of the holy vessel and this particular virus, this virus is still very new, but we have recent studies as well, that have been done with this particular virus, and how it persists on surfaces, on different kinds of surfaces. So it persists less on certain types of surfaces, such as copper. And there's a reason for that. Copper is very conductive. There's a lot of electrons going around, and sort of oxygen radicals that are formed and can bounce into the viral coat and break it apart. But that's still within about half an hour. So if a priest who's infected kisses the chalice, there will absolutely be a virus clinging to that chalice.
For
And
how
if the
long? For how long?
well, if the chalice is made of copper or some kind of antimicrobial silver, perhaps that would be, according to the study, 30 minutes if it's copper. If it's other type of metal, I don't know, it may be longer. But what I do want to say is we can be sure that if an infected priest comes in contact with the chalice, we can be sure that within at least half an hour, even 4 hours, there's infectious viral particles on there.
Right, right. So about the we're talking about a rather brief moment in the celebration of Holy Communion being distributed, right? So we're, regardless of whether we're talking about half an hour or 4 hours, uh, your answer to it, the possibility of it being on a surface that's metal, copper would be the shortest duration for the half-life of the virus. Other types of metals would be longer, right? Okay, so I wanted to establish that, and thank you for your response. I want to get to the whole issue of, that it's in the claim that's been made. Well, it's impossible for anything bad to happen around Holy Communion, or now getting very close to the dangerous topic. Dangerous from all sides, I think, because one does have to be careful about speaking about the holy mysteries. And, it's my life. The liturgy is really my life, on various levels. And I don't say it lightly. But when St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, when he talks about the possibility of people even dying because they are not discerning the body and blood of the Lord, he is specifically speaking about, before people get upset that I'm pointing this out, he is specifically talking about dying from receiving Holy Communion in an unworthy manner. And he says, it's not a very dark thing for him to say, because he says, well, the Lord is disciplining us that we not be judged with the world. He disciplines us, in what we call punishment by God. He's disciplining us. So in this case, my question has always been, well, why wouldn't God use various ways and means, because this is a material species. The sacred species are sanctified, yes, and transfigured, but by, bread and wine. So why wouldn't God use this visible world also when he's perhaps disciplining us with the virus, and perhaps giving us all this kind of, you know, excommunicating us for a while, as he had, because people have said, no, it's only, St. Paul is only talking about, I'll stop this tirade, but I'm going to ask you, sorry, but I want to set the background for, this whole possibility of one being harmed through Holy Communion. When St. Paul says about unworthy communion, and people say, I've heard them say, he's only saying it about unworthy communion. To me, the funny thing is that someone approaches the chalice and thinks, well, I'm worthy. I don't commune unworthily. How does the human being receive that assurance? Why wouldn't the church say today, well, God has sent us this virus that indeed, because of the way it works, can be transmitted. We'll get to you explaining to us how it's possible that the sacred species can carry the virus. That's The virus isn't wanting to do any harm. It just wants to replicate itself. That's what it's created to do. But why wouldn't we assume in our humility that God is reminding us that we're unworthy in the first place? Why is that a bad thing to admit? People are like, no, it's only unworthy, but we're all worthy. So the virus can't touch us because we know that we're worthy. Maybe God is punishing us for this attitude towards, and we have been excluding from Holy Communion certain classes of people for centuries. What if maybe, I'm not saying it's tied to that, but maybe uh, we're all being reminded that we're unworthy. But no, we're saying, no, St. Paul only said that many of you die, as many are dying now, my friends. He says many of you die because you don't discern the body and blood of Christ. Well, maybe we have a big communal sin regarding Holy Communion. Maybe we haven't discerned. Maybe we all just, we've been poorly, maybe we've abused Holy Communion. So I'm introducing the topic of the next question in this way, that we shouldn't start immediately foaming at the mouth saying, oh, this is a faithless person if anybody says or suggests that the sacred species could possibly pass on harm. St. Paul says that they can. In the case of the unworthy, well, what if we're all unworthy? So here we go. The final question is, how would you? It's the penultimate question, actually. How would you describe what's going on if the sacred species can possibly be carriers of the virus? Explain how you, in your vision of the actual material side of this sacrament.
Yeah, so in my article, while I was developing the article, I immediately thought, so as a person who sees under the microscope, so the world that the naked eye of most people cannot see, I immediately thought of what is in the holy gifts, the physical elements of the holy gifts. I'm not speaking about the mystical aspect of it, but what is in that consecrated wine? And there's, well, grape juice, there are sulfites, there's yeast, there's other ingredients in there. So very much a virus, a pathogen, a microbe could also be present in there. And these are all elements of our physical world. So they can coexist together in that cup. That's how I see it.
So
Yes.
within the chalice, in the sacred elements, could the virus survive?
Yes, because the byproduct, which is alcohol, that is within the consecrated wine, it's very low in alcohol content, so it cannot inactivate a virus such as SARS-CoV-2. You would need a 70% and above, so it can very much coexist and be present as an agent in the cup if an infected person is communed and inadvertently the spoon is returned back into the chalice. That's how it can be transferred back.
So now let me get to my really final question. What would be your suggestion, Dr. Nedelescu, as both a biologist and faithful Orthodox Christian, as to the best way to approach the celebration of the Eucharist and its distribution at this time?
So, as a biologist who works with viruses and is aware of how they are transferred, the method that has to be employed to keep people safe is a method that takes away possible cross-contamination from person to person, from one person's mouth to another person's mouth. That's really the only way. From a Orthodox faithful point of view, and I wanted to bring this up earlier, is I don't see why the mystery of the holy gifts cannot still be a mystery whether the virus is present or not, because the mysteries of the holy gifts are still a mystery even if all the other ingredients are present. The ethanol is present, the yeast is present, the sulfides are present. So it's two very separate things.
Um, well, I meant like a practical suggestion. What
Sorry.
would be what would be a safe uh, method from the side. We can't be safe from the side of our unworthiness unless we check ourselves, as St. Paul suggests. But from a practical side, what would you
So
imagine to be an effective and also not too somehow either not making the faithful somehow too uncomfortable?
right. Well, I mentioned no cross contamination. That means that there cannot be the use of a shared object, such as a liturgical spoon. If a liturgical spoon is to be used, it cannot be shared from one person's mouth to another person's mouth. So the spoon can still very much be retained, but it has to be used only in one person's mouth. So there has to be individual spoons and to distribute the holy gifts, so that so that contamination from person to person and viral transfer cannot occur.
Right. When the priest is distributing communion, say he is using different spoons, it's always a question of what to do with a spoon if it's been used only for one person, right? Um, is it going to be a disposable spoon? This has been suggested. Disposable wooden or bamboo spoons that are also eco-friendly. They can be burned. The only thing you could do with it, according to liturgical piety and the way we approach the holy gifts, uh, the spoons would be burned. Would you see that as a viable option from the hygienic standpoint?
Yes, absolutely, and that's actually I've been in contact through our local priest with an infectious disease clinician, and he too recommended disposable spoons. It's absolutely a very safe option. It may be too much of a change for some people. And so that's where perhaps the metal spoon, many metal spoons are discussed as well. Uh, Regardless of whether it's a disposable spoon or a metal spoon, is that it can only touch one mouth. It just cannot be shared.
Right, but then there are the people handling those spoons when they are to be. I'm not sure what they do with the metal spoons. I know that
Yeah.
they are using multiple spoons, but I'm not sure what
So
to do with the spoon.
so yeah, I want to add. So you add an important point. So this infectious disease clinician absolutely recommended the disposable spoon. That way, you use it one, get rid of it. Because if the individuals don't know how to handle viral objects with virus on it, then yes, it can be a problem. Even though, say, you use that metal spoon and put it in soapy water, if you don't know how to handle it and you accidentally touch, then you have it on your hand and it will go on to someone else.
Oh,
So
right, right. So it would, if I'm hearing you correctly, the say a disposable spoon is used, it goes into a bag that will also be burned, like a paper bag, right? And not touched, uh, not handled.
yeah, you have to handle it with the highest safety levels. Yeah,
Well, how about, the priest is, usually the priest says a certain formula of the to the as a person is receiving communion. Servant of God, so and so receives. Uh, I hear it in Slavonic, so I can't say it in English by heart. In any event, this moment and sometimes people will say what their name is. The Greeks actually don't have this moment, as far as I've observed. Um, but is this, exchange between priest and communicant, uh, is that unsafe?
It can very well be, because a priest and a communicant come in very close contact with one another. And the breath. So um, I have a really good example for that. When you imagine yourself in the cold weather and you see your breath come out, um, that's an example of aerosolization. And so the louder you speak, or the when you know the if you're super infectious with a lot of viral particles, then there's a very high chance that the next person coming in close contact with you can have some viral particles come into the mouth.
Oh, right. So,
So some kind of a shield would be useful.
or a mask for the, I
Absolutely,
mean,
for the
obviously,
priest, yeah.
for the priest.
Yeah,
Oh,
a mask is, I mean, we have a lot of evidence that a mask can contain, uh, and can change the trajectory of viral particles. It also provides a humid environment. And so those viral particles just fall quicker to the ground. So a mask is quite effective. It's not bulletproof. We cannot go out wearing a mask and think we're not going to be infected.
right, right.
But
It seems to me, also because of this, the many question marks, some of these things are not question marks about this virus, about it being highly infectious, as far as I understand. But there are those question marks, and I think that there has to be always a little bit of a reasonable, compromise. Because to completely guarantee, I mean, if you leave the house at all, to guarantee that you're not going to get infected. Even now, when we have, well, now in Austria, practically everything's open. Actually, we've done very well. There's been no spike. And Austria actually was very good at handling this, as far as I've seen. Anyway, but I think that if someone like tends already towards like OCD, or people who just are sort of tend towards a lot of anxiety, there could be, unreasonable, I think, unreasonable, reactions to this. And I'm wondering uh, how that compromise can be made in the church environment, because, like at the beginning of the infection, I can share about myself that I found that it's not sustainable to, I was like, I still have to work for a living. Like, I can't just be disinfecting door handles, I can't be washing my hands all the time. I don't actually tend towards OCD. I'm not that type, but I came to some kind of a reasonable coexistence with the reality of the virus, and, you know, social distancing, and I didn't, have contact in a real face-to-face conversation for over 2 months with anybody, because I live alone. And I know that this has been difficult for a lot of people, but all I want to say is that where's that line? Where's that line where you're going to be reasonable but not being able to do anything? Because we have true and real dangers of, if you look at the statistics of leaving your home in
yeah,
general. I realize that that's different, but if you take that to the logical conclusion, you would just be in the fetal position under your bed or your desk, not leaving, because the chances of something happening are there. So with the virus, I realize this is a different situation, but I do feel like there is some kind of there has to be, because we're probably going to be living with this
yeah,
indefinitely to some.
yeah. It's going to stay with us for a while. The best thing is, so we trained in the lab have a very good awareness, and I think the best thing to do is to educate for us and others to educate the public, because there has to be an awareness of whether, if I went and pumped gas and I touched that pump, you have to remember that that's a common uh, pump touched by many hands, and you will not eat with that hand, you will not touch your face until you wash it. You just have to have this instilled in you, and we do in the lab, and now the general public has to. And I think at first perhaps they were very scared, people were very scared, and I think now they just are beginning to learn, be more aware. I've touched that door handle, I now need to wash my hands.
Right.
Or I've touched that door handle and I'm not going to touch my face until I can wash my hands. So we don't have to go to OCD. We don't have to.
Right. Like those things, obviously, in public spaces, those, the entrance to the supermarket, if you have to touch a door or something. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I'm just thinking about that kind of finding some kind of a balance in that reality. And I pray, of course, that our hierarchs can find, a reasonable way to live with this somehow.
Yes, they will. They will have to. They just have to, and they are, the experts in the liturgy side, and they just have to implement something. I think that we have to. I want to make one remark. We have to shift our thinking, because if we affirm that Holy Communion is mystically for the salvation of our souls, we cannot expect this mystical aspect of Holy Communion to inactivate a virus in the manner of soap or other detergents. The sacrament of communion does not offer what one might consider magical protection. So for me, I think if this were true in fact, then we have to ask, why aren't all people who suffer from chronic illnesses healed upon taking Holy Communion? So I think we have to be have more reverence and be more respectful there towards the mysteries.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Nedelescu. Yes, I suppose it would be ad absurdum, to take that thought about, the way people are defining what Holy Communion does as if it's this medical, like its primary purpose is to somehow guarantee physical health. I mean, it's about communion with Christ, but that this is this, yes, there are phrases about it like the bread of immortality, but people receive Holy Communion on their deathbeds and die.
Yeah,
we, we,
and
we ourselves, when we receive communion, if I take this thought of the way people are perceiving the sacred species, then I could go outside and, jump off a building because, I mean, I'm indestructible. And that would be to tempt God, as Christ said to the devil in the wilderness. He himself didn't throw himself off the rooftop, because would he have survived, Jesus Christ? I think he would have, but he taught us not to tempt God,
yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So I wish it wouldn't be dividing us, of all things, what's supposed to unify us.
Yeah,
Holy
that's some yeah, that's something I've been thinking about. How can I better bring and close the gap between the two views? So I thought with my article and with this interview, I thought maybe I can provide some clarification from my view of someone who's working and sometimes makes these viruses.
There's one more thing I'd like to ask you that I think is on lots of people's minds. What is this talk and also stuff that I read about there being additional waves, or at least another wave, say in the fall, maybe, or when. Tell us about what do you know about another wave of this virus?
Yes. A so-called second wave. It's called a second wave, third wave, fourth wave. A second wave is already beginning to appear in the southern states here in the U.S. Cases are increasing. This may have been due to either the more laxed stay-at-home orders, as well as we are at the period right now after Memorial Day. Uh, and also after some of the gatherings. So we're at that period mid-June where we were expecting this second wave, and these second waves have happened in history and in past pandemics, and they will happen differently in different parts of the world. It has a lot to do with how much of the stay at home and isolation was implemented.
So now I think I'm going to have to wrap this up, Dr. Nedelescu. It's so lovely to have you on the show. And really, I am so grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. Perhaps you'd like to say something in conclusion to our viewers.
Well, I'd like to first and foremost thank you very much for having me on your show, Sister Vassa, because this is a responsibility for me to inform not only the public, but specifically the Christian Orthodox community about the realities of this current SARS-CoV-2. And I really believe that if I wasn't saying these things also to the church, I wouldn't be doing my job.
Well, thank you again so much. Everybody, I'm also saying goodbye. Let's all thank Dr. Nedelescu for her time and useful information for all of us. I want to remind everybody to sign up for the upcoming Orientale Lumen 24 conference. And I'm going to put the link up right here. Archbishop Elpidoforos will be a speaker. Yours truly is speaking. There'll be a panel discussion on, all the panelists. It's an online conference on June 23rd. So do sign up. Do not hesitate, my friends. And also, if you've been missing out on our weekly podcast, do sign up for that because we have new subscribers practically every day. We have a nice, tight-knit community there, lots of vibrant conversation and living the faith on a daily basis, going through the church calendar, the daily saints, hymnography from the church services of every day, just a little bit in the morning to charge your batteries. I think you'll find it fun. And you can always unsubscribe, so it's not like joining a gym. Just try it. All right? Morning coffee with Sister Vassa. Try it. Dr. Nedelescu, sorry to keep you waiting after my little plug there of the podcast and the conference. You take care. All the best to your husband and your little boy.
Thank you.
Say hello to them from me. Okay, bye now.
Bye. Thank you very much.